Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, and I'd like to say thank you to Matt, Julie and Renee from Flinders, University of Adelaide and University of South Australia for presenting today's ANZREG webinar on fulfilment networks. The session is being recorded and the recording will be available afterwards. We'll post the link to the ANZREG website and to the ANZREG list. If you have any questions for Julie, Renee or Matt, could you keep those to the end of the session, their presentation? And also, if chat is available, if you want to type any messages into chat as well. I'll keep an eye on the conversations in chat and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So to get us started, I'd like to introduce Matt Hooper. Matt is the Senior IT Systems Officer at Flinders University. Matt is the poor bunny responsible for the management of Alma, Leganto and Primo at Flinders and the integrations with other university systems. Matt has previously worked at the University of South Australia and has been responsible for working with various teams to implement Voyager, Primo, Alma and Leganto, and is now working with online learning systems within Information and Digital Services, Central ICT. Renee Anderson is Metadata Services Coordinator at the University of South Australia. She leads the team responsible for the management of Alma and the provision of metadata for library resources. She also coordinates the delivery of inquiry services by staff within the wider resources and technical services team through the Ask the Library service. And Julie Wright is a library systems coordinator at the University of Adelaide, who works with departments both within the library and across the university to support Ex Libris products. Julie managed the implementation of Alma and more recently Leganto at the university and provides training to library staff. After spending 25 years working for library software vendors before commencing at the university, Julie has supported Ex Libris products and worked with many of their customers in this region. Julie has a vast wealth of knowledge on configurations and functionality. So thanks Matt, Renee and Julie for sharing today's your knowledge and your experiences with the fulfilment networks in Alma. And I'll hand over to you, Matt, to get us started.
All right, thanks, Sue. Can everyone hear me? I'm just doing a quick sound check.
Yes.
You can raise your hands if you want.
Yes, I can hear you, Matt.
I can hear you, Matt.
I can hear you too.
All right. Cool. We've basically broken this presentation down into three sections. The presentation I'm going to be speaking to is about basically the history of the fulfilment network and how we sort of got to where we are. And then hopefully Julie and Renee are going to pick up from the other two parts of this session. And then, as Sue mentioned, we'll hopefully have time for questions at the end. So to give you a brief rundown, essentially, obviously we've talked about 3 universities in Adelaide and we have a long history of collaboration. There are several committees at the university librarian level and also at the systems advisory group level between the 3 universities. They've tended to wax and wane, given there's been some restructures in the last 10 years since we've actually gone live with various systems. So things have sort of changed, but there seems to be a demand coming back in for some of those groups to be picking up again. And to give you a point of interest, there's a joint library store at Earth which contains low-use material from all 3 universities. It's basically a central service point with 3 different collections from 3 different institutions in there. And it not only handles the physical fulfilment, but also some of the interlibrary loans and document delivery for those institutions as well. And probably it's worth pointing out as well that as part of that need, we have a sort of a courier system running in terms of the fulfilment activities. There is some fairly rigorous scheduling around when materials picked up and dropped off between the three institutions. We also have reciprocal borrowing arrangements between all three universities. Basically, there allows material to be borrowed between the three different institutions. And this has sort of been going since the Dynex period of time, where we were sort of, would have been pre-2001 from memory. And basically, historically, we used to charge a net fee in terms of transaction costs. So, for example, if University of Adelaide had 3 transactions per year, Adelaide had 2, and Flinders had 1, we'd basically only charge the institutions the net cost of those transactions. So the total amount in surplus. And basically, this has been going on for quite a while, and it's only been recently that we've sort of got rid of that cost. And I think it's really been due to the, I guess, the evolving nature of the fulfilment network, and basically where we've sort of had to, I guess, prioritise what we really care about. And obviously charging between the 3 universities hasn't really been that much of a priority in the last couple of years. We've also had demerit points as well. It's basically a way to discourage overdue items. And it's not without issues, obviously, when we're talking about transactions between institutions, whether we look at, we've sort of historically had demerits between the institutions, but that also has been waxing as well. And basically, the relevance to Alma has been decreasing in terms of how it's really sort of caused to focus on what we really care about, and perhaps obviously charging and demerits, which are basically impediments to student activities, that has sort of become a bit, hasn't really become of any real sort of interest for us. And as I mentioned before, the 3 previous systems we've sort of had, Dynex, we've had a reciprocal borrowing between the 3 institutions for that. Voyager, for those of you more recently, I don't know whether you remember universal borrowing and the joys of having the different clients on the machines for different institutions and all the fun and shenanigans with that. And Alma, with the fulfilment network, that's been a more recent development. And to be honest, for us, we basically implemented the bare bones configuration for that, and obviously with functionality improvements over the years, perhaps that's something we need to have a look at, and that needs to perhaps evolve a bit more. So for us, fulfilment networks offer a great flexibility in terms of walk-in loans, direct requesting, return anywhere with the network. That's something we've sort of looked at, but we haven't really sort of taken up to the full capability, and there's primarily some logistical issues with that. Obviously, with the courier running between the library branches and campuses, return times can vary, but and also there's also potentially some issues in terms of getting those items back to the home institution and then out again. We also have the service where we can pick up anywhere in the network, and again, that's also sort of bound by logistical issues. Obviously, if you've got large fulfilment networks across large areas, large geographical areas, I think you'll probably find you probably need to, I guess, agree on some base or core functionality for that. And we also have the network Patron card and Primo. That's had some issues, I'll be honest, and say that we haven't really sort of focused too much on that. I guess mainly our policy has been that if you want to look at your loans, log into your home institution and look at them from there. In terms of actually allowing users to log into fulfilment network partners, that really hasn't been a focus for us at all. And so just to recap some of the historical issues we've had, I guess basically we've had issues with registration, and that's been an ongoing issue. We ran some reports recently as part of this presentation, and we noticed that as a result of running some of those reports, we still have some institutional borrowers which are actually have been created as local user records as opposed to pulling them in from the fulfilment network. And that's obviously had issues in terms of how those records display when users go to login or request. Also, abilities potentially to request from within Primo. most institutions within our fulfillment network allow requesting for material potentially, depending on the scenario. But for us specifically, we've sort of disabled on-shelf requesting for reciprocal borrowers. And I guess the primary sort of reason for that is basically to keep our high-use material on the shelf where it can be used for our users. And obviously, if it's not high use, fulfillment network partners are quite welcome to come in and borrow if they want. But in terms of requesting it, obviously there's logistical issues with taking stuff off the shelf, as opposed to, say, for example, if it's already out on loan and being returned and then goes into transit to whichever fulfillment partner needs the material. Obviously, with the network Patron card in Primo, there have been some issues with seeing all user activity across the three institutions. I know, for example, UniSave have had some issues recently getting some of their records or information displayed from other institutions. There's a real, I guess, lack of information in terms of the configuration for this in the Alma and the Primo side of things. And that's potentially something that we think Xlibris could address to make things a lot easier to configure. Obviously, if you've got multiple fulfillment partners, we've only got three institutions at the moment. But if you're looking to expand that, obviously the complexity of that would also increase as well in terms of what you need to configure. And just to basically recap, some of these are obviously configuration issues. As I mentioned before, when we went live with the fulfillment network, we had a base configuration. And to be honest, some of us haven't really looked at that in great depth, whereas others, sort of as new functionalities come in, we've updated the configuration for that. And that's potentially caused a bit of a disconnect in terms of settings across the three partner institutions. And basically, we're a little unclear in terms of the functionality of the fulfillment network in terms of how much it relies on servers being co-located within data centers or even on the same Alma or Primo instance. And that can potentially have issues, obviously, when you're trying to communicate between those either different data centers or different servers. And look, to be honest, as I said, that's probably one of the areas that perhaps documentation in terms of setting up this sort of thing could quite easily be improved. In terms of the Alma configuration, this is basically what we've talked about previously. And so basically, is the configuration the same within each institution? We're pretty sure it's not. And in fact, we've identified some potential pain points for us. And when we talk about does the configuration need to be the same, obviously there needs to be some base configuration done. And that's probably the most important stuff to set up when you're looking at fulfillment networks, to get that core functionality in place, to actually allow users to be able to borrow, to be able to request, and potentially be able to see what they've actually borrowed and requested within your discovery system. Hopefully that's Primo, but it could be different depending on how your institution is set up. Now, at this point, I'd like to introduce Julie Wright. Julie is going to talk primarily to the Alma configuration side of things. And what I'll need to do is briefly unshare this presentation and open up a Word document with some of the configuration settings we've got. So, Julie, if you want to take it from here while I set this up.
Okay, so what I will be talking about is just showing you the configurations that we needed to set up. And as that slide indicated, Xlibris had to do something to start with to set us up as a group of three in a fulfillment network, but sometimes that's a little bit behind the scenes, so I'm not exactly sure what they had to do. But if you are thinking about setting up some sort of a fulfillment network, then you'd need to contact Xlibris to start with. So what we'll look at now, one of the things I'll mention here is that this configuration is like all over the place. It's not all in one particular point. So the first part is in the general area of the configuration. You would have a section called Fulfillment Member, and that lists the other institutions in the network and what their URL is and what the display name is. So this screenshot here is showing you what Flinders looks like with them, and obviously there's reciprocal. So yes, we all have to have this set up, but obviously it's going to be a little different for each one. The next thing is in that same area, there's something, sorry, just go back up a fraction, please. Institutions relations, that's actually an empty table in each of our institutions, and I believe that's really around using pick up anywhere or return anywhere. And as Matt indicated already, we haven't delved into that side of it. We had a brief look at it a couple of years ago, but haven't really come to any firm agreement on whether or not we want to do those activities that use that functionality. Then you have to go to the fulfillment area of configuration into the general other settings. And it is the same at all of our institutions in that we don't share Primo. So it's not a shared Primo account. Then further down, we go to, just a little bit further, Matt, please. Then you have to go to the user management into the collaborative networks, and there's something called linked account rules, which enables you to configure a group to which walk-in patrons are assigned. And here you can also configure the expiration date and purge dates. It can be absolute relative to the source institution or updated from the source each time the data is refreshed. We're all using the default, but some information is slightly different. So this is Uni SA's, the first screen. So they set a user group of reciprocal because that's the user group they use for the reciprocal borrowers. Their expiry from the source is same. Whoops, just letting Matt get that sorted. The expiry is from the source, so same as in the source. The purge after expired, I know we've got something a little different for some of these. It's 1 week after expiration here, but sometimes it's different. This is particularly an area we are going to look at because we think it may be causing some issues between our institutions and the reciprocal borrowing. And then if we scroll down a little bit further, I think we've got Flinders, an example of the same record. So they've got a user group called Reciprocal Patron that they use. And keep going. And I think we get to the Adelaide Uni one. And you'll see in our record, it might be on the next page, we actually use 3 user groups for reciprocal borrowers. So we haven't selected anything for the user group. And they're refreshing the expiry date and the purge date, I think, is slightly different at our institutions. So again, as I said, something we need to review and look at. And that's all on that one. And the next one is something called restricted users. So they're unexposed to the fulfillment network. And they can be different depending on whether you want some user groups not to be able to use the fulfillment network. So Flinders has this table empty, but University of Adelaide and Uni SA have included any user groups they don't want to include. So Adelaide Uni is showing here in the display. So there's a few user groups we don't allow to have access to the fulfillment network. Searchable identifiers, you can limit the network services to patrons that have been issued with a specific ID type, but that table is empty at all of our institutions. Linked account shared fields, when a new linked user is created, the originating institution defines which user attributes may be shared. And this is the same at all of the institutions. We've actually made all of these fields or left all of these fields as true so that all of this information can be pulled in from the source to the current institution. Then we need to go to the user management into the general other settings, and you get to see where you allow other members of the network to search for your patrons by name. So interesting, this was true at Flinders and Adelaide, but false at Uni SA. I'm not sure whether they've updated that recently, but that again, it's an area that we're been looking at, and this has been a great impetus for us to actually start looking at some of these things and a few little issues that we have. And the roles and registration, so the user registration rules, we all use default terms of use, but some of the values are slightly different. So when does the patron role renew? When does the user renew? The thing to bear in mind with this one is that it is across the board for any user registration, so it is going to affect any sort of new users that get added manually. But for us, we were having a lot of problems with the records that were created, that the patron role had an expiry of 1 year. So we actually increased ours to 5-year patron renewal on the role. That's on the role. And there is another field for user renewal period, which defaults to 6 months. So you'll see at UniSA, I think they've still got the role set at 1 year. So we changed ours to 5 years. But again, something that we'll be looking at together to see if that needs to be adjusted. And mostly related to the network zone, in the resources area, there's in general and other settings, and it's the same at all of the institutions. There's just a few fields that are related to the network. So that's network label, template, rules, precedent, these things that you're seeing on the screen. But they're all set to default except for the network search password, which Ex Libris actually updated that for us. So that's all the configuration. I just wanted to quickly show you then what it actually looks like in Alma if you have got the network fulfillment set up. So when you go to manage patron services, you have a little box at the top above where you're scanning for the ID or searching for a patron, and it says find user in other institution. And it's a checkbox. And the other part is when you're managing users, if you add a new user, you get the same option. You can find the user in the other institution. Or if you're updating an existing user, you get to see at the top in this local section, you see this particular user is coming from Flinders, and further down is all the details of that particular record. So that's pretty much all of the configuration. Just to recap, it's a little bit all over the place, and that's unfortunate, but once you have it all set up, then it's pretty straightforward to use, just using the reciprocal borrowing. So we have users coming from, at Adelaide Uni, we have users walking in from Flinders and UniSA and being able to borrow material off our shelves. That's all on the configuration. So I'll hand over to Renee now to talk about some of the issues and some comments, etc., and some statistics.
Okay, so to start off with, I thought I'd give you a bit of an idea of how much the service is currently used. So yeah, as Matt said, we sat down a little while ago and put our data together. So we pulled this out of analytics. For those of you who are analytics nuts like I am, you can actually run these reports quite easily if you are using the fulfillment network, because there is a field in analytics called linked from institution name. So that lets you easily filter for patrons from your reciprocal institutions that are in the same network zone as you. So here we've got the stats from 2018. So all up there were 1,788 loans by 290 users. So between Adelaide, Flinders and UniSA. Interestingly, Adelaide appears to be loaning out a lot than the other institutions are, and Flinders seems to be borrowing a lot more than the other institutions are. So as Matt said, we don't do any sort of charging between the institutions. This is just more just so we can see what's happening and yeah, see who's using the service and how much. The numbers aren't really big, but reciprocal borrowing isn't something that we really heavily promote at our institutions. It's not one of our core services that we promote. So yeah, we're not surprised that the numbers aren't massive. We also still operate interlibrary loans and document delivery between our institutions. So that's another way that we still sort of share resources between the two institutions. So on to some issues and comments that we've come across. So both Julie and Matt have also have already mentioned a few issues. But yeah, in general, using the fulfillment network to create a patron record is straightforward. As Julie demonstrated, yeah, it's just a matter of when you create the patron record, either through managed patron services or managed users, that you tick the little box to say that you want to search in the other institution. And then you select the institution they're from and enter an identifier. We have recently changed our, so that, yeah, we've recently changed the setting so that you can, so that you can search for more than just the ID. So we used to just search for a barcode, but now you can search by name or email address as well. So that makes things a bit easier. The one issue with the searching though is it doesn't work like your usual search box. So usually you can start typing in and it'll start to sort of autofill and suggest patrons. It doesn't work that way with the fulfillment network. You have to type in your full search string, and if it isn't an exact match or it matches more than one patron record, you actually don't get any patron record pulled down at all. There's an try again. So that's a little bit confusing. Once you get used to that, that's okay. A couple of other issues we've run into are where, as Julie also mentioned, where the patron role has expired, but the account itself hasn't expired. So in that case, you have to update the role expiry. Our staff at UniSA usually just delete the patron role and re-add it because they found that's the easiest way to do it. We think though, if we were to update our patron role expiry period to a longer period, like 5 years, like Adelaide have done, that might solve that issue. But we've obviously got to look into the other impacts of that first. Another issue is when there's an expired patron. So sometimes you need to search for the patron again in their home institution and then re-pull down the data so to refresh that expiry date. We also recently changed a setting so that expiry dates are refreshed. So this also might prevent any issues with that in the future. Another issue is that there's varying levels of personal data that are stored in our Almas. So at UniSA, we don't store personal data like date of birth, but Adelaide do. So this means that when we link to a record from Adelaide, we're actually pulling down quite a lot more personal information than we would ever have for our own patrons. As Julie showed, this can be configured in the linked account shared fields table. So this is something that we're going to look at as well to work out what exactly what information we want to share between our institutions. Another issue we used to have in the past, I haven't had so many reports about it lately, but that's with invalid data being pulled down, and that prevents the record from saving. So when you do your initial search, you try and save, say, the Adelaide record, the record from Adelaide on our local Alma, and it doesn't save. It's in the past, it's been because there's been some odd symbols in phone numbers. So we think we can probably resolve that by looking at normalizing phone numbers using regex, or maybe even not enabling phone numbers to be shared across the network. So now I've covered the few little issues. There's also some really good bits. So as Julie's mentioned as well, once you've configured it, it's actually really straightforward. So creating and maintaining the records is much quicker than having to manually create a patron account like we do for reciprocal borrowers from other states. And then once they have a local record, you can manage them and search for them, and just the same you would any other local patron. When we've encountered the few issues that I've mentioned, they're rarely a major problem, and most of our staff are able to solve them on the spot without any additional help. So they're easy enough to overcome. From a patron perspective, I think the fulfillment network works really well. They're not having to give us extra information when they register that they already have given to their home institution. I think a big plus for them is that they can see their loans from any institution in their home library account. So they can, at UniSA, they can log in to their account in Primo and they can see what they've borrowed from Adelaide and Flinders without needing to manage another account and password. So going forward, there's still a lot of sort of review of the fulfillment network that we need to do. We still need to make sure that we've got our configuration optimized, and there's still those few little issues that we need to resolve. But I think overall, us getting together to put this webinar together has really forced us to review this, think carefully about how we're going to operate the network, and how we can, I guess, continue to work together to improve this service for the patrons across all three of our universities. That's all from me. So does anyone have any questions?
We've got a couple of questions in chat. So I'll start with those two. And then if other people have questions, could you write those into the chat? So the first question is from Philippa at Western Sydney University. Are the blocks at home institutions reflected at the reciprocal location?
I think that is one of the settings that we have configured so that blocks are shared across. Is that right, Julie?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, yep. So yeah, if you try and same as if you've got a blocked local record, same thing. They can't block, they can't borrow, which I think is an important one because you don't want a blocked student at UniSA jumping across to Adelaide and borrowing their books because they've been blocked locally.
Thanks, Renee. The second question is from Tony Wyatt, Macquarie University. Just to confirm, fulfilment network loans is only available when the client from other institution walk in to borrow from another institution, i.e. no request allowed?
That's the only part of the fulfilment network that we're using at the moment. There is the ability to allow the requesting, to allow pickup anywhere. So somebody from Adelaide could request something from Flinders and have it delivered here to Adelaide, and then if that was the pickup location that the student had asked for, and return anywhere as well. But those are those things we haven't implemented between the three because of the logistics of all of that and having the courier bringing that material backwards and forwards. Renee, Matt, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say we're basically really only talking about physical material here and not digital requesting. So reciprocal borrowers can't request chapters be digitised or anything like that at the moment. And as I think I mentioned previously, we don't allow on-shelf requesting for reciprocal borrowers. So it's really just to try and keep the high demand stuff for Flinders users where we think it's appropriate.
Does anyone have any other questions? Julie, Matt and Renee, have you been using Fulfilment Network from Go Live? So
yeah. Yes.
So that was 2013?
That's right, yeah. I mean, as Matt said at the beginning, we had it set up in Dynex and it was called reciprocal borrowing. And then when we went to Voyager, it was called, what was it called, Matt? Universal borrowing. And then I can't remember now whether or not it was part of the development that we requested as early implementers of Alma to have the fulfillment network, or they called it fulfillment network after we'd sort of asked for the same as universal borrowing in Alma.
Yeah, I mean, demerits in the fulfillment network came a lot later, but yeah, basically the base functionality was pretty much there within the first 6-12 months of Alma, from what I understand.
Yeah, I think just the reciprocal borrowing was there, but the return anywhere and pick up anywhere that's newer. That was in the last year or two.
Okay, so there's still development work going on.
No, I don't know that there's any development. I don't know whether there's any development work going on, to be honest.
Yeah, we've got a couple more questions. Do you use your home institution student staff card to borrow?
Yes, so when the account is created, you still need to scan in a barcode, and at UniSA we just use their, the Adelaide or Flinders student card just because that makes it easier, so they don't have to have an additional card.
And the next question, with sharing of personal patron data, is there any additional permissions sought from the patron at the time of joining?
Not at UniSA. So yeah, the data that's coming down is whatever was on their, say, Adelaide or Flinders account. So it's I guess it's data that was already on their own on, say, the Adelaide version of Alma. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that we really do need to look at is the sharing of that personal data. It really should just be limited to the information we need. So, name and email address, I think.
Also, I don't know whether I told Renee, but we have made changes to our patron loader so that we're not actually loading that information from PeopleSoft anymore. So the date of birth is no longer being put into Alma, and their local, their home addresses and phone numbers, etc., aren't. And that may have resolved the problems where there were strange characters in the phone number, because a lot of them are from their home addresses and phone numbers, and that might be in China or Vietnam or somewhere like that. So I think they were the records that were causing problems, but we no longer load that information, into Alma. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I think for us, we'd be really wary about loading anything about gender or date of birth as well as a specific sort of example. Yeah.
Another question, when you create the user record pulled from the home institution, is it easy to add your own statistical categories?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we still do that. So the same as when you just create one from scratch. It's just you get the same user management screen. It's just that some of the data has already been pre-filled from their home account. So no different to usual.
Yeah, I guess the same for us as well.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, here's one. Items for ILL versus network fulfillment. Do they have the same policy?
For us, sort of, but obviously we need to take into account lead time for actual posting out the material. We've recently pulled out our flexible delivery service out of Relay and put that into Alma via the personal delivery option. And obviously we've had to adjust some of our fulfillment rules to take into account the time it takes actually to ship out some of the material. For example, like 7-day loans. We've basically doubled the loan period for those, but not necessarily the renewal period. So you still get the same amount of loan time, but just that the renewal period goes from, say, 7 days to 14 for those particular category of users. And I guess that's probably similar for document delivery as well.
Is that the same or similar for UniSA and Adelaide?
I can't think off the top of my head what we've got for each of them. Sorry. I know that our reciprocal borrowers definitely get a different policy to our sort of institutional borrowers, but I'm not quite sure how that compares to ILL. Sorry.
I think the difference would be that for the network fulfillment, basically what you're talking about is we at Adelaide Uni, we've got a patron record in Alma for somebody from, let's say, UniSA, and they are part of a reciprocal user group for us, and we have the terms of use set up behind that for our reciprocal users, so how long they can have the items out on loan, etc. When it comes to ILL, if we get a request in from Flinders and we send an item out to them, that's, like we share all our material. There's no limit on that. But once it gets to Flinders and they lend it to one of their patrons, I'm not sure. They may end up, it may be lent for longer because they've got a local user group that they're using. They're not using, it's not a reciprocal borrower, it's their own user. So that's the only thing I can see as different for the lending side of things.
Yeah, I mean, look, for us at the moment, all our ILL stuff is done through Relay, which is a separate system. We did experiment with doing some NCIP integrations, but that sort of fell in a heap with some of the early implementation of resource sharing. But basically, I think from memory, I think we've got a 6-week loan period for most of our interlibrary loan stuff. So that's basically for 4 weeks is our general loan rules for most material that's not sort of high use or anything. And that sort of takes into account then a 2-week sort of grace period for getting material out and potentially returning material as well.
Yeah, that's true. If the item comes into Relay for us and there's a certain due date, then we have to work with that as well.
Yeah. Do you use the courier service for resource sharing requests between the libraries?
For us, the courier service is pretty much for everything in terms of anything that gets shipped between the libraries for internal postage or even internal mail, for example, that also gets shipped through the courier.
Yep, same here.
Yep.
I was trying to think, the courier service is a couple of times a day between the three of us.
Yeah, it's basically a long loop, and then obviously they have to do another loop again. And there's a few stops along the way that we.
I was going to say that also does the pick up and drop off between the joint store as well. So that's part of that that sort of inter-library courier service.
Another question, sorry, this might be just a comment. UniSA use the borrowing period as set by the lending institution with a delivery delay needing the item back prior to that date.
So that's Frank, who works in our interlibrary loan. So he's the expert.
That's good. He's on the call.
He's watching.
Yeah. Do you think the volume would go up substantially if enabled to pick up return anywhere compared to resource sharing? I
think it might. I mean, that's an added convenience for patrons. They're not having to go to a different campus. I mean, it is inconvenient, I guess, having to go somewhere new and drop off somewhere that's not near where your lectures are. So, I imagine we probably would. But as, Matt and Julie both said, there's sort of some added complexities that come with enabling that sort of functionality. Yeah,
I mean, for us, I'm with the advent of sort of delivery services like Deliveroo and Uber and that sort of thing, the Uber Eats stuff, I'm sort of assuming that people will be more likely to have something sent to their home as opposed to having to come into an institution to pick it up. So for us, maybe the interlibrary loan is the better option in the sense that they can actually have the material sent to their home location, but I guess obviously that might vary between institution and the user population.
Renee said there would be Lamingtons. I don't see any.
From interlibrary loan again.
Okay. They might get a little squished in the post though.
Yeah. Okay, so that seems to be the last of the questions. So we might wrap up and just thanks Matt, Julie, and Renee for presenting and sharing the fulfilment network and how you're using it today. Thanks for your time in preparing this, and thanks from the ANZREG committee and from the ANZREG community for today's session. There will be, our next ANZREG webinar will be following Igloo, giving feedback on the conference. If you're going to be at Igloo and would like to be part of that webinar, could you please get in touch with either Julie or me. We already have Kirsty Nicholson from University of Western Australia participating in the webinar. It'd be nice to have a few others as well to give feedback. Also, if there's any topics that you'd like covered in a webinar or something that you'd like to present, could you also get in touch with us so that we can be sure that the program is reflecting your needs and your interests, and that we get more engagement happening with the community. And thanks again, Matt, Julie and Renee. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.